The message came at the exact moment the building fell silent. That strange hour when even the air feels like it's holding its breath. She was still there, finishing what no one else could, her screen glowing in the dark like the last working signal in a collapsing system. "We deleted your profile." No warning, no discussion, just a clean surgical sentence, as if she had never existed inside the system she built piece by piece. She didn't react immediately, not because it didn't matter, but because she understood something they didn't. Something quiet, structural. Because when access disappears, it doesn't always mean control is gone. Sometimes it means someone just triggered a process they don't fully understand. The office after midnight had a different personality. It stopped pretending. No polite noise, no artificial urgency, just the low electrical hum of systems still running, like a heartbeat no one monitored anymore. Screens dimmed themselves into sleep, but hers stayed awake. She always stayed later than the others, not out of loyalty. That illusion had burned out years ago, but because certain things simply refused to be rushed. Systems like this didn't tolerate shortcuts, and she knew every fragile intersection inside it, every dependency, every silent agreement between processes that only worked because she had designed them to. The report on her screen wasn't just a document. It was a map. 3 departments, 2 external partners, 1 contract structure so tightly interwoven that even small adjustments sent ripples through everything else. She had spent months stabilizing it after the last optimization initiative, the one that looked brilliant in meetings and catastrophic in reality. Her cursor blinked at the final paragraph. Save. A small, almost invisible action. But in systems like this, timing was everything. She didn't rush it, didn't double-click. Just one deliberate press. Controlled, precise. Saved locally. Then, encrypted copy. Then, external sync. Each step executed like muscle memory, not paranoia, discipline. Only after that did she lean back slightly, letting the tension in her shoulders release by a fraction. That's when the message arrived. No greeting, no context. "We deleted your profile." She read it once, then again, not because she didn't understand it, but because she wanted to confirm the tone. Flat, administrative, almost casual, like removing a file that no longer served a purpose. Her access panel flickered a second later. Restricted. Then another line appeared in the system log. Automatic, indifferent. User permissions revoked. Efficient, immediate, final. On the surface, it looked clean, decisive, controlled. But she didn't move, didn't reach for her phone, didn't open a new window, didn't even sigh. Because while they were watching access, she was thinking about structure. Access was never the core. It was just the interface. The real system lived underneath. In dependencies, in timing sequences, in authorizations that didn't sit on a single profile. In processes that required continuity, not just permission. And those processes were still running. She glanced once more at the saved files, the timestamps, the confirmation logs. Everything aligned exactly where it needed to be. Then she closed the laptop. Slowly, without urgency, as if nothing had happened. As if the system hadn't just been forced into a state no one had modeled. Because in environments like this, the most dangerous moment isn't when something breaks. It's when everyone believes it won't. And somewhere, buried deep in the structure they thought they controlled, something had already shifted. Something they hadn't noticed yet. But they would. Very soon. And at that very moment, they will no longer be able to roll everything back. Morning didn't arrive. It snapped into place. Fluorescent lights, hurried footsteps, screens lighting up one by one. The system came back online like a city switching from silence to noise in under a minute. But something was off. Not broken. Not yet. Just slightly misaligned, like a clock that's off by a few seconds. Invisible at first. Harmless if you don't know where to look. At 8:12, the first flag appeared. A routine data pull from the external partner failed. No alarm, just a quiet retry. At 8:19, the retry failed again. At 8:27, someone in operations frowned at their screen and refreshed the dashboard. Probably latency, they muttered. It wasn't, because at 8:31, a second process stalled. Different department, same dependency chain. Still no panic. Systems fail all the time. That's what redundancy is for. Except, redundancy requires continuity. And continuity requires something very specific. Something that had been removed last night with a single, confident decision. 8:44. The third failure didn't look like the others. This time, the system didn't retry. It paused, as if waiting for an authorization that never came. A silent request hanging in the architecture like an unanswered question. That's when the first call happened. Hey, do you have access to the contract layer? Yeah, but it's read only. That's not right. Another call, another screen, another refresh. The noise in the office began to shift. Not louder, but sharper. Focused. Fragmented. By 9:02, 3 departments were looking at the same problem from different angles, and none of them could see the whole picture. Because the whole picture didn't sit in one place. It never did. It lived in the connections. In the exact sequencing of approvals, validations, and silent handshakes between systems that were never meant to operate independently. And somewhere in that sequence, there was a gap now. Small, precise, almost elegant. 9:11. The first escalation email was sent. Subject line neutral. Language cautious. Minor access inconsistency affecting process continuity. Careful words, safe words. Because no one wants to be the first to say what it actually is. But by 9:26, the CFO's dashboard showed a delay in a critical contract execution. And delays at that level don't stay minor. They expand. Exponentially. 9:34. Who owns access rights for this layer? Silence. Not the quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind where everyone assumes someone else knows the answer. Another question. Sharper this time. Who removed the profile? A pause. Then, it was approved. Approved. Such a clean word. It implies control, certainty, authority, but approval doesn't guarantee understanding. And understanding was exactly what was missing. Because what they removed wasn't just a user. It was a key junction point. A live connector between processes that had no documented fallback. A human layer embedded so deeply into the system that removing it didn't break anything immediately. It just made everything wait. And waiting in systems like this is the beginning of failure. 9:52. Legal was looped in. At first, just as a precaution. A formality. But contracts don't care about intentions. They care about execution. Timing. Compliance. And compliance doesn't tolerate gaps. 10:07. Counsel opened the agreement, scrolled past the summaries, past the simplified interpretations, straight to the structure, clause by clause, until their eyes stopped. Section 9, access rights. A section no one had mentioned that morning. A section most people assumed was standard. It wasn't, because buried inside it was a condition. Not obvious, not highlighted, but precise, binding, unavoidable. And as they read it, slowly, carefully, the room around them seemed to narrow. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a system delay anymore. And the moment that realization fully lands, everything changes direction. There's no quiet fix, no internal workaround, only consequences that move faster than anyone expects. By 10:19, the room had stopped pretending this was a minor issue. The tone shifted, not louder, but colder. Focus replaced assumptions. Every word became measured, every pause deliberate. Counsel didn't raise their voice. Didn't need to. They simply turned the screen. Section 9, access rights. A single clause. Clean, precise, and suddenly, very expensive. Access removal, they said slowly, requires continuity validation and authorized transition. A pause. Neither occurred. Silence didn't just fill the room, it settled into it. Heavy, structural, like something that wouldn't leave easily. Because now it wasn't about who made the decision. It was about what that decision had activated. Across the table, someone shifted in their chair. Someone else opened their laptop. Not to work, but to confirm what they were already starting to understand. There are moments in systems like this when control quietly changes hands. Not through confrontation, not through authority, but through architecture. And this was one of those moments. Because the system wasn't failing. It was responding, exactly as it was designed to. And that design had a memory, a logic, a boundary they had just crossed. If you've ever watched a decision look harmless until the structure behind it starts to unfold, you already know what comes next. Stay with this, because the real shift doesn't happen when access is removed. It happens when the system decides what that removal actually means. Follow, like, and don't miss the next chapter. This is where just a decision becomes a measurable cost. By 1043, the building had lost its rhythm. Not chaos, something more precise. A system trying to correct itself, without the one element it was calibrated around. The CEO was already in the room. Not at the head of the table, not yet, but standing, arms crossed, watching the screens like they might explain themselves if he stared long enough. "They'll fix it," someone said quietly. It sounded reasonable, logical, but logic in this case was part of the problem, because every attempt to fix it assumed the system was broken. It wasn't. 1051. IT initiated a manual override, temporary permissions, elevated access, clean, efficient, denied. No error message, just a silent refusal, the kind that doesn't invite discussion. A few seconds later, another attempt. Different route. Same result. Denied. Now people stop typing, not out of confusion, out of recognition. Because systems don't refuse commands without a reason. They enforce something. And whatever this was still in force. 1102. Legal didn't move from their screen. They weren't searching anymore. They had already found what mattered. Now they were verifying, cross-referencing, tracing implications forward like someone mapping the path of a fracture through glass. "Continuity requirement," they said finally. No one asked them to continue. They did anyway. Access rights under Section 9 are not tied to a user profile. They're tied to a function. And that function requires a controlled transfer. A slight pause. Without it, the system is obligated to suspend execution. Suspend, not fail, not crash. Suspend. As if the entire structure had simply stepped back, waiting. 1114. Operations tried to bypass the contract layer entirely, route around it. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like it might work. Then the downstream validation rejected the input. Not loudly, not dramatically, just invalid. Because the system wasn't just enforcing access, it was enforcing sequence. And sequence, once broken, doesn't accept shortcuts. The CEO finally sat down, slowly, not defeated, but recalibrating. That subtle shift when confidence turns into calculation. Who can restore it? The question landed flat, because everyone in the room already knew the answer. They just didn't want to say it first. 1126. A name appeared on the screen. Not highlighted, not emphasized. Just present. In logs. In authorizations. In every chain that now led nowhere. A single point of continuity. Removed. Without transfer. Without validation. Without understanding what that point actually connected. Someone cleared their throat. "We can recreate the profile." It sounded like a solution. It wasn't. Because profiles can be recreated, but continuity can't be faked. The system doesn't recognize copies. It recognizes sequence. And that sequence had already been interrupted. 11:38. Legal closed the document. Not abruptly, just with finality. If this isn't restored properly, they said, we're not looking at a delay. A pause. We're looking at breach. There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, but definitive. Because contracts don't negotiate with internal decisions. They measure outcomes. And right now, the outcome was starting to take shape. Slowly, precisely, like a calculation no one in the room could stop anymore. Somewhere in that silence, the realization fully settled. This wasn't about fixing a mistake. This was about reversing a decision that had already moved through the system and triggered something irreversible. And the longer it stayed unresolved, the more expensive it became. By 12:03, the room had changed temperature. Not physically, structurally. Conversations shortened. Movements became economical. Even the air felt denser, like every decision now had weight attached to it. No one was suggesting quick fixes anymore, because quick fixes had already been tried and rejected. The CEO leaned forward, fingers interlocked, gaze fixed not on the people in the room, but on the screen where the logs continued to update with quiet, mechanical indifference. Every line told the same story. Request, validation, pause, over and over again. A loop, perfectly consistent, perfectly correct, and completely unusable. 12:11. Caller. No hesitation this time. No layered phrasing. Just a direct instruction. Stripped of tone, stripped of ego. Because at this point, the system had already made the hierarchy irrelevant. Someone dialed. The room didn't speak. They listened. 1 ring, 2, 3, then connection. No background noise, no movement. Just a calm, steady presence on the other side of the line. Hello. Neutral, controlled, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, no one answered, because this was the part no one had prepared for. Not technically, not structurally, humanly. The CEO took the phone. A small movement, but in that moment, it carried more weight than any decision he had made that morning. We need to restore access. Straight to the point. Efficient. But efficiency doesn't always translate into leverage. On the other side, a brief pause. Not hesitation. Assessment. I'm aware, she said. No edge, no satisfaction. Just clarity. Which somehow made it worse. Because she wasn't reacting. She was already ahead of the situation. We can recreate your profile, he added. And there it was. The last attempt to frame this as something simple, something procedural, something fixable without acknowledging what actually happened. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Recreating the profile won't restore continuity. Exact words, no deviation. The same logic the system had been enforcing all morning, now spoken out loud, in human form. Around the table, someone shifted. Someone else looked down. Because once a system's logic becomes a person's argument, you don't negotiate with tools anymore. You negotiate with consequences. What do you need? The CEO asked. The question landed differently now. Not as authority, as recognition. Another pause. Not dramatic. Not prolonged. Just long enough to make one thing clear. She wasn't deciding what to say. She was deciding how much to reveal. A controlled transition, she replied. The exact phrase from Section 9. No embellishment, no explanation. Because explanation was no longer required. Everyone in that room already understood the framework. They had just ignored it. And until then, a quieter voice this time. Not the CEO, someone else. The kind of question that comes not from strategy, but from pressure. From the awareness that time is no longer neutral. A soft exhale on the line. almost inaudible. "Until then," she said, "the system will continue to suspend execution. Not threaten, not warn, just state." As if she were describing the weather. Something inevitable. Something already in motion. The call didn't end abruptly. It just concluded. No closing remarks. No attempt to soften the edge. Because there was nothing left to clarify. 12:27. Silence again. But now it wasn't confusion. It was alignment. Every person in that room saw the same thing. The same sequence. The same outcome forming in real time. And for the first time that day, no one tried to interrupt it. Because the system had already defined the path forward. And it didn't include shortcuts. Only one option remained. Do it properly, or watch everything. Come to a complete, measurable stop. By 13:02, the conversation had shifted from what happened to what must be done. A subtle difference. But in systems like this, it marks the exact point where narrative ends and accountability begins. No one questioned Section 9 anymore. No one argued about access, permissions, or technical limitations. Those had been settled, not by opinion, but by outcome. Now the room was focused on one thing: restoring continuity. Properly. 13:11. Legal outlined the sequence. Not quickly, not vaguely. Step by step. Controlled transition. Formal acknowledgement of interruption. Reassignment of functional authority. Not profile access. Validation across all dependent systems. Each point landed like a checkpoint. Not negotiable, not optional, and most importantly, not instant. Because continuity, once broken, demands reconstruction. Not imitation. 13:24. The CEO signed the authorization. No speech, no framing, just a signature, precise, deliberate. The kind of movement that doesn't try to regain control, but accepts the cost of losing it. 13:31. The process began, not in the main system. That would have been too visible. It started in the structure underneath. Logs reopened, dependencies traced. Every connection that once flowed through her now required explicit validation. Time moved differently here. Slower. Not because of inefficiency, but because accuracy had replaced assumption. 13:47. Her name appeared again in the system, not as a restored profile, as a verified function, temporary, controlled, exactly as Section 9 required, no more, no less. And for the first time since morning, the system responded differently. Request, validation, execution, a small shift, almost invisible, but absolute. Because execution had returned. 14:03, processes resumed. Not all at once, not dramatically, one by one, like lights coming back online in a city that had never lost power, only paused. 14:18, the contract layer stabilized, external partners synced, delayed operations cleared their queues, dashboards corrected themselves, quietly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. But the room knew better, because nothing had been fixed. Everything had been restored to its required state. Through cost, through time, through exposure. 14:32, legal closed the case file. Continuity reestablished, they said. A simple phrase. But it carried the full weight of the day, because everyone in that room understood what it really meant. The system had not failed. It had enforced its design. Exactly. The CEO stood up, looked once at the screen, then away. No closing remarks. No attempt to reframe the situation, because some outcomes don't need explanation. They define themselves. And somewhere in the quiet space between decisions and consequences, a new understanding had settled in. Access is visible. Control feels immediate. But real leverage lives in continuity. And once you break it without understanding, you don't lose access. You lose time. You lose position. You lose the ability to decide how the story unfolds, because from that moment on, the system decides for you.